Having spent 2 years as a park ranger on the Appalachian Trail, I thought I'd seen nearly everything this wilderness had to offer. Over time, I'd handled lost hikers, surprising animal encounters, the occasional sneaky late-night camper, and even a few practical jokers. Yet there was always something about patrolling the trails after dark that kept me on edge. It wasn't the usual wildlife or the rough terrain. It was more about how the forest seemed to awaken in a different way once the sun set. Some of my colleagues would say the trail transformed into a different realm after dusk, and I never truly understood what they meant until one strange, truly unforgettable night last autumn. The Appalachian Trail can stretch for days without any sign of civilization. However, there's a specific section near my regular patrol route where we enforce strict rules. Absolutely no camping, no fires. That particular part of the path runs dangerously close to a deep ravine, and over the years we'd witnessed enough accidents there to keep it strictly off limits after dark. If I found someone there, my duty was to direct them away. But that night, it wasn't a lost camper that caught my eye. It was something no training manual could have ever prepared me for. It was just past midnight and I had been out on solo patrol for a couple of hours, doing my usual rounds. That's when I noticed a soft, shimmering glow through the trees, a little farther off the main path. At first I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light was faint, more like a gentle pulse, and the forest was utterly silent. Normally you'd hear leaves rustling or some nocturnal creature moving through the undergrowth, but there was nothing. I continued walking, thinking perhaps someone had ignored the rules and set up a camp. It wasn't unheard of, especially with certain individuals who felt they were above trail regulations. Yet as I drew nearer, an odd feeling began to creep over me. The light wasn't the warm, familiar glow of a campfire, nor did it look like a modern headlamp. It flickered and swayed, like an old-fashioned lantern. But who uses lanterns out here anymore? I stepped quietly off the main trail, keeping my flashlight aimed low to avoid revealing myself. The strange light seemed to be drifting deeper into the woods, as if it were beckoning me somewhere, and I found myself following it without truly thinking. The faint beam would flash through the trees, always just far enough ahead that I could never quite make it out clearly. But each time I thought I'd lost sight of it, it would flicker again, just a little farther ahead. I consider myself a logical person, or at least I try to be. But the entire situation made no sense. No one was supposed to be out here, especially not carrying an ancient lantern. Every logical part of me screamed to turn back, but there was an undeniable pull to that light, a way it just kept drawing me in. I told myself I'd simply get a closer look, ensure no one was establishing a rogue campsite, and then return to the main path. Easy enough. As I ventured deeper, the air felt thicker, somehow heavier. My own breathing sounded too loud in the profound silence. It felt like I was being gently pulled along, and then suddenly, the light vanished. I stopped dead in my tracks, scanning the trees, wondering if perhaps whoever was holding it had finally noticed me and extinguished their light. But as I stood there listening, I noticed another unsettling detail. There wasn't a single sound around me. No chirping insects, no breeze rustling the leaves, nothing. It was as if the entire forest had fallen completely silent. I continued walking, much slower now, straining to see or hear any sign of life. Then, as abruptly as it had disappeared, the light flickered back on. This time it was farther away, almost as if it were testing me, seeing if I would keep following. I hesitated, but I had already come this far. The ranger part of me, the one that always needed answers, won out over any lingering fear. I needed to understand what was happening. The closer I got to the light, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. Branches appeared to stretch out of nowhere, brushing against me. The undergrowth grew denser, forcing me to step carefully over roots and duck beneath low-hanging limbs. Then, without warning, the light stopped moving. It hovered there, suspended in the darkness, flickering faintly like an invitation. I stepped closer, trying to remain calm, but just as I got within a few yards of it, the light winked out again, leaving me standing in absolute blackness. The sudden intense darkness made my heart leap, and I quickly turned my flashlight on full beam, sweeping it through the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever had been holding that lantern. Nothing, I muttered to myself, trying to keep my composure. All right, whoever you are, you got me. My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness, but there was no reply. I decided I'd give it one last look before heading back, so I took a few steps forward, turning in a slow circle as I moved my flashlight beam. But as I was about to turn and leave, a faint glint caught my eye. I took another step closer and froze. In the beam of my flashlight, hanging from a low branch just a few feet away, was an old rusted lantern. It looked ancient, like something from another era, with glass panels covered in grime, and a handle that appeared untouched for years. There was no sign of the person who'd been carrying it. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anyone had even been there. The lantern just hung there, swaying ever so slightly, as if caught in a gentle breeze. Only there was no wind. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that lantern suspended from the branch. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on it. My duty as a ranger held me rooted to the spot. I was terrified. Every shadow around me felt like it was closing in, but I couldn't ignore the safety hazard. The thought of an unattended flame in the middle of these woods kept me from walking away. Reluctantly, I took a few steps closer and reached out to grasp the handle. The lantern was heavier than I expected, cold and rough to the touch. With one last careful look around, I twisted the knob to extinguish the flame, plunging everything into utter darkness. I quickly placed it back on the branch, wiping my hands on my pants, and began backing away. As I made my way back to the main trail, every few steps I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that eerie light flicker back to life behind me. By the time I made it back to the main path, dawn was just beginning to break. I don't think I've ever been so relieved to see the sun creeping up over the horizon. I didn't tell anyone about the light right away. I wasn't even sure what to say, and I figured no one would believe me, but the whole experience just gnawed at me. The next day I returned to that specific part of the trail, trying to find any evidence that someone had been camping or hiking out there. But there was nothing. No fire pit, no trash, no footprints, just an empty stretch of forest that looked like it hadn't seen a person in years. I still work that same area and continue my night patrols, though I've never seen the lantern again. But every once in a while, when I'm out there alone in the dark, I'll catch a flash of light through the trees, just a brief glimpse, a flicker, as if something is still out there, waiting for me to follow. And now whenever I spot a glint or a shimmer deep in the forest at night, I keep my distance. I tell myself it's just the reflection of my flashlight, or perhaps another ranger. After a quarter century in firefighting, you'd expect I'd witnessed every imaginable scenario: harrowing accidents, dramatic rescues, and some truly bizarre incidents. Yet nothing ever unsettled me quite like what transpired that morning on the Appalachian Trail. I was out before dawn, aiming for a vigorous hike, in a lungful of fresh air. The mountain fog was exceptionally thick that day, rolling in so densely it felt almost tangible, blanketing everything in sight. But fog was no stranger to me. I'd grown up on these very trails, learning to navigate through the soupy, misty mornings. At 45, having survived more than a few close calls on the job, a quiet walk in the fog hardly seemed like a risk. I'd parked at the trailhead just before, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sunrise if the fog eventually lifted. My car headlights barely pierced the haze, and the world outside felt muted, muffled. As I started up the trail, I could barely see more than a few steps ahead. Normally the woods burst to life in the early morning, birds chirping, branches creaking, squirrels scampering, but that day it was eerily silent. About half a mile in, the path widened into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it, a dark shape standing utterly still in the middle of the trail. It was perhaps 40 yards ahead, perfectly motionless. My first thought was purely practical, likely another hiker, who had paused to rest, or maybe become disoriented in the thick fog. So I continued walking, expecting the figure to step aside or offer a wave, but it didn't move. It just stood there. "Hey, morning," I called out, my voice sounding dull and swallowed by the fog. No response. I stopped, squinting through the mist, trying to discern any details. The figure was too far away to see clearly, just a silhouette, tall and slender, its head tilted slightly as if looking directly at me. Something about it felt off. It didn't shift or fidget, remaining perfectly still. I hesitated, weighing whether to approach closer or turn back, but I dismissed the feeling, assuming they were lost in thought, or perhaps listening to music through headphones. I took a couple more steps forward, then paused again, watching. Still nothing. "Everything okay up there?" I called out again, louder this time. Silence. The fog shifted, thinning just enough for me to get a slightly better view. The figure wasn't directly facing me, but had its head turned slightly to the side, as if listening, waiting. A slight prickle crawled up my spine, but I shook it off, telling myself it was just the strange lighting, the fog playing tricks on my eye. Another few steps forward, and then they vanished. Just like that. One moment they were there, solid and real. The next, the fog rolled in, and they were gone. Now I've seen fog do peculiar things. It can distort images, make shadows dance, even make stationary objects seem to move. But this was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I hurried to the exact spot where I'd seen the figure, looking around for any sign of movement, footprints, or even a dropped item. Nothing, just fog and silence. Even the air felt different, too still, too quiet. A little while later I stopped to take a quick drink, and as I stood there, I heard a scream, high-pitched and absolutely chilling. It cut through the fog like a knife. It sounded close, perhaps only 100 yards or so back along the path I'd just come from. My instincts ignited, that old firefighter training kicking in hard. Someone could be in serious trouble. I spun around and called out, "Hello? Where are you?" There was no answer, just silence. I waited, straining my ears, but the scream didn't come again. I disliked the idea of ignoring what I'd heard. While there was a chance it was an animal, a fox or even a bird, it had sounded unmistakably human to me, shaky and desperate. Against my better judgment, I left the trail and stepped into the woods, moving in the direction I believed the scream had originated from. It was risky. Wandering off in this dense fog could easily lead to getting lost, and I knew the dangers of that all too well. But that scream was seared into my mind, and I couldn't just walk away from it. As I pushed through the thick undergrowth, I kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. The fog made it feel like I was trapped in an impossible maze. Every tree looked identical to the last, and soon enough I'd lost sight of the main trail entirely. That's when I heard a rustling sound up ahead. The noise grew closer, branches snapping underfoot, as if someone or something was moving directly toward me. But I couldn't see anything in the thick white blankets surrounding me. I called out once more, "Is someone there?" Silence again. Then another distinct snap. I braced myself, trying to make sense of the sounds. The rustling grew louder, now coming from different directions, almost like there were several sets of footsteps moving around me, circling. I took a few steps back, searching for any sign of movement, and then nothing. The sounds. I stood there, heart hammering, waiting. "Alright," I muttered to myself. "Time to head back." I turned around, figuring I'd simply retrace my steps and find the trail again. But that plan was far easier said than done. The fog seemed even thicker now, swallowing up the landscape around me, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. I started walking, trying to keep my movements steady, hoping I'd recognize something. A distinct tree, a particular rock, anything to guide me back to the path. Just as I started to get my bearings, there it was again. Another scream, piercing and desperate, echoing through the fog. It was closer this time, and my instincts flared up, urging me to move faster. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The scream had sounded precisely the same as before, the exact same pitch and tone, like it was a recording played back. It didn't feel. I pressed on, more cautiously this time, and then through the mist, I spotted the figure standing just a few yards away, barely visible in the dense fog. It was the same as before, unmoving, its outline fuzzy and distorted, and once again it stood there, completely still, facing me. My first thought was that it might actually be someone truly lost, someone in desperate need of help. But as I squinted, trying to discern any details, a cold realization solidified in my mind. There was no color, no discernible features, just a faint, pale outline, almost like a shadow. I took a step back, and the figure seemed to dissolve once more,
blending seamlessly into the fog until it was utterly gone. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there, but I couldn't find the trail. I couldn't even tell which direction I'd come from. Finally, I managed to spot a slight break in the trees that looked familiar. I followed it, hoping it would lead me back, and after a few minutes, I found the main trail again. Relief washed over me, but I didn't feel safe just yet. As the sun climbed higher, the fog began to thin, and the trail became clearer. I quickened my pace, desperate to put serious distance between myself and whatever I'd just encountered. I didn't stop walking until I was well past the section of trail where I'd seen the figure. Back in the open air, where the fog had truly started to dissipate, I whipped around, scanning the empty trail. There was nothing. No, I wanted to believe it was just the wind, a trick of my tired mind. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something utterly beyond my understanding. I didn't allow myself to linger after that. The sound of my own footsteps was somehow comforting. I kept them steady, rhythmic, trying to erase the memory of that desperate scream, and the silent figure that had stood watching me in the fog. Once the sun was high enough that the trail was fully visible, things felt almost normal. The birds had resumed their singing. The trees seemed to relax, and the eerie silence that had haunted me earlier had melted away. The fog thinned to scattered patches until it finally vanished completely, leaving the forest clear and calm under the mid-morning light. But my nerves hadn't settled. Originally, I'd planned to make a full day of the hike, reaching a scenic overlook further up the trail, but that idea no longer felt inviting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something that didn't want me there. So I cut the hike short, turning back far ahead of schedule, and headed straight for my car. As I finally stepped out of the woods and into the open lot, I let out a long, shuddering breath. I still hike now and then, but I haven't been back to that particular trail, and whenever I think about it, I can still hear that scream echoing in my ears, that desperate, bone-chilling sound. I'm not sure what I saw, or if it was real, or just some bizarre trick of the light, but either way, I'm not in a hurry to find out. I had spent months meticulously planning this Appalachian Trail adventure. This trip was meant to be my perfect escape after a long, exhausting school year. As a teacher, I get that precious summer break, and every year I strive to do something different. This time it was I wanted to immerse myself in nature, perhaps clear my head before the inevitable chaos of the next school year began. And honestly, the chance to say I'd hiked a significant portion of the Appalachian Trail sounded pretty fantastic. In the first few days, I was covering a steady number of miles each day, pacing myself and truly soaking in every bit of the wilderness. Every now and then, I'd encounter another hiker, but mostly it was just me, my backpack, and the winding path. At night, I'd pitch my small tent, read a bit, and drift off peacefully under the stars. It was incredibly serene, almost like stepping back in time to a simpler, more tranquil existence. On the third day, I noticed a narrow, unmarked path branching off the main trail. It was nestled between two large trees, their branches arching overhead like a natural doorway. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it if I hadn't paused to adjust my pack. The path didn't look like part of the main route, but I couldn't resist. Curiosity completely took over. I figured it might be a shortcut to a scenic viewpoint, or something interesting worth exploring. After all, I'd come all this way to discover, right? As I ventured down the side path, the dense forest seemed to close in around me. It was notably quieter here, somehow, and the tree canopy was much thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. But I convinced myself it would open up soon, leading to a beautiful vista, or even a small clearing. A few minutes in, I started to realize the path was becoming even narrower. The trees on either side felt like they were pressing in, and thick bushes crowded the way, forcing me to duck and sidestep around branches. The packed dirt underfoot gave way to patches of mud, with strange roots poking out like hidden tripwire. About half an hour into the trail, I began to seriously question my decision. It didn't seem to be leading anywhere. It just wound deeper and deeper into the woods, becoming less defined with every step. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it was undeniable. The path was disappearing, almost as if the forest was swallowing it whole. It no longer even felt like a trail, just a fading gap between trees. The unsettling part, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me. Every time I stopped to listen, the sound would halt too. I initially thought it might be an echo of my own steps, but after a while, it became clear that wasn't it. Someone or something was keeping pace with me, and it seemed to know exactly when I was listening. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but that only worked for so long. Eventually I spun around, expecting to see a deer or some other animal lurking, but there was nothing, just trees and shadow. I took a deep breath and kept moving, forcing myself to focus on finding a way back to the main trail. I'd had quite enough of this little detour. After about an hour, it hit me. I was completely lost. I'd been trying desperately to retrace my steps, but everything looked identical. Trees, bushes, shadows, no landmarks, no clear path. My phone had no service, and the GPS was as confused as I was. Every time I thought I was back on track, I'd encounter the same fallen log or twisted tree, like I was moving in endless circles. The footsteps started up again, and this time they didn't stop. I could hear them clearly, crunching through fallen leaves, snapping. They'd get closer then fade away, only to resume again a few minutes later. I shouted out a few times, hoping it was another hiker, but there was no response, just that eerie silence broken only by those persistent steps. Panic began to set in. I was miles from the main trail, hours from anyone who might hear me if I called for help, and the daylight was rapidly fading. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded here overnight, especially with whatever was out there. I kept moving though, telling myself I just had to keep going, that I'd eventually find my way back. But with every step that hope dwindled. The footsteps continued, and I swore I could see movement in the trees, shadows darting between the trunks. I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that someone was following me, matching my exact pace. Just as the sun began to sink out of sight beyond the horizon, I stumbled into a small clearing. A huge weight lifted from my shoulders. It was the first open space in the forest I'd seen in hours. I dropped my pack and took a moment to catch my breath, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd find some landmark or clue to help me get back on track. That's when I saw a faint path leading out of the clearing. It didn't look like much, but it was. I grabbed my pack and started down it, my steps quick, my eyes darting around, half expecting to see those shadows closing in.
But then the path vanished again, swallowed up by the forest. I stopped, trying to get my bearings, when I heard a low whisper, soft and almost melodic, drifting through the trees. I couldn't quite make out the words, but it sounded inviting, like it wanted me to follow. I took a step forward, drawn to the sound. It led me deeper, winding through the trees, guiding me farther from the main trail, farther from safety. And then it stopped. The silence was deafening. I was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back. And now, with the sun gone, and the forest cloaked in impenetrable darkness, I was at the mercy of whatever was out there. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, listening to the silence. But eventually I forced myself to move, to keep walking, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The forest seemed alive, shadows shifting and twisting. I could feel it, something watching, just beyond the edge of my vision. I stumbled, tripped, and clawed my way through the darkness. Hours passed. I don't know exactly. I lost all sense of time. The forest seemed endless, stretching on forever, like a labyrinth. And then, just as I was about to give up, I saw a faint glimmer of light, barely visible through the trees. I pushed forward, desperate for a way out. The light grew brighter, closer, until finally, I broke through the trees and found myself back on the main trail. I don't know how I made it out, don't know what led me back, but as I stood there, catching my breath, I knew one thing for sure. I would never ever set foot on that side path again. The forest had shown me its true, terrifying face, had let me glimpse the darkness that lay hidden beneath the trees, and I knew deep down that I was incredibly lucky to have escaped with my life. I can't shake the feeling that whatever presence was in those woods had simply let me go, almost as if it made a choice. Since then, I've told anyone who asks about hiking the Appalachian Trail the same thing: stick to the main path, do not wander down unmarked trails, and don't go looking for a better view. The forest there, it has a mind of its own, And trust me, it's best not to discover what happens when you delve too deeply into its mysteries. The Appalachian Trail might be breathtaking, but it holds secrets. After an intense week of shifts, I was desperate for a breath of fresh air. I'd picked up a last-minute overtime shift the night before, and my body ached with exhaustion. But the thought of being out in the open, surrounded by tall trees, instead of fluorescent lights and glowing monitors, sounded exactly like what I needed. I wasn't planning anything strenuous, just a short solo hike along one of the quieter sections of the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I packed a light day bag, grabbed my water bottle, and set out early in the morning to avoid any other hiker. This particular part of the trail was secluded, barely touched by others, which was perfect for clearing my head. The first hour was wonderfully peaceful. I lost myself completely in the natural beauty around me. The golden sunlight filtering through the dense tree canopy, the rich earthy scent of damp soil, the soothing sounds of the wilderness. It was precisely the restorative experience I craved. I was well into my hike, perhaps another hour past the trailhead, when I first noticed something amiss. Far off to my right, maybe 50 yards from the path, stood a figure. At first I didn't give it much thought, assuming it was another hiker who had wandered off for a bit of personal solitude. But something about their posture was unsettling. They were standing unnervingly still. I slowed my pace, squinting through the trees to get a better look. The figure seemed to be facing me, though it was difficult to tell with the way the shadows danced across their form. The sunlight filtered down through the branches, casting a strange, almost unnatural glow around them, making their skin appear ghostly pale. It was truly odd, and for some reason, I felt a prickling unease. "Hey," I called out, hoping to dislodge the creeping discomfort. "Are you okay?" No response. The figure remained absolutely motionless, staring in my general direction. I couldn't even discern if it was a man or a woman. They just seemed to be there, blending into the shadows yet somehow starkly standing out. I took a hesitant step forward, hoping a bit of movement on my part would provoke a reaction. But the figure didn't stir an inch. I debated whether to approach closer, but something deep down told me not to. Still, I took another step, peering through the trees for a clearer view. And then they turned. It wasn't a normal turn. It was too smooth, almost like they were sliding, drifting deeper into the woods without making a single sound. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe they hadn't heard me, or perhaps they were simply enjoying their own quiet time. But as I continued walking, the feeling lingered, that persistent sensation that something was profoundly wrong. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just worked up from the grueling week I'd had. Another half hour passed, and I tried to settle back into my hike, focusing on the rhythmic sound of my breathing. But that unsettling feeling never completely faded. I kept checking behind me, certain I'd catch a glimpse of that figure lurking in the trees. And then I saw them again. This time, they were much closer, perhaps 30 yards away, standing off to my right. Same pale skin, same motionless stance, facing. I stopped it in my tracks, a wave of profound chill spreading through me. How had they gotten ahead of me without me noticing? "Hello?" I called out, louder this time. "Is everything all right?" Nothing. Not a flinch. Not a sound. They just stood there, watching. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched them, waiting for some kind of reaction. I took a step back, my eyes never leaving the figure. And then, just like before, they turned, gliding away deeper into the woods, until they simply vanished from sight. It was almost as if they were trying to lead me somewhere. I was officially unnerved now. There was something incredibly wrong with this person, and I definitely didn't want to find out what it was. I turned back toward the main trail, picking up my pace, keeping a sharp eye out for any familiar landmarks that would lead me back to the parking lot. I walked faster, telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just a strange hiker with an odd way of moving, or perhaps even someone playing a prank. But deep down, I didn't believe. There was something too unnatural about the way they appeared and disappeared, like they were somehow part of the forest itself. The trail wound down into a hollow, and as I descended, the air grew cooler,
The sunlight dimmed. I had to slow my pace as the path became steeper, but I kept checking behind me. When I reached the bottom, I paused, catching my breath and looking around. The trail was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. For a moment I thought I'd lost it, but then in the corner of my eye, I saw it again, just a hint of pale skin peeking from behind a tree. I froze, staring at the spot, but there was nothing there, just shadows and trees. I forced myself to keep moving, quickening my pace, desperate to put some serious distance between me and whatever that was. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I reached a familiar clearing. I was instantly relieved as I recognized the distinct trail marker just ahead. I was close to the parking lot now, maybe 10 minutes away. I practically jogged the rest of the distance, but as I broke into the parking lot, I couldn't help but look back. There, standing just at the edge of the woods, was they were farther away now, almost swallowed by the deep shadows, but still watching me. As I hurried back to my car, fumbling with my keys, I looked over my shoulder one last time and saw the figure take a few steps toward me. It was just enough movement to send my heart racing even harder. My hands shook so badly that I struggled to get the key into the ignition, and the engine felt like it took ages to finally turn over. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped out of there without a single glance back. Even now, lying in bed, I can't shake that moment from my mind. The logical side of me tries to convince me it was just some lost hiker, but deep down, I know better. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I can't shake the chilling feeling that whatever I saw wasn't supposed to be there, and it certainly didn't want me there either. If I'd hesitated a moment longer, if I hadn't managed to start the car, well, I don't even want to think about it. One thing's for sure, whatever was out there, it wasn't something I'd ever want to meet again. If these chilling stories made you reconsider your next outdoor adventure, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of terror. Have your own unsettling experience in the wild. Share every spine-tingling detail in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear them. And always remember, on trails like these, trust your deepest instincts, because sometimes the wilderness watches back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.